All right, so welcome to Adlerian Therapy. Of course, I'm David, and I'm going to take you through this theory. So let's get started. Alfred Adler, uh, much like Freud, grew up at the same time as Freud and grew up in Vienna as well. He did not have a happy childhood. He spent a lot of his time, he was sick, and one of 9 children. He like I said, was sick at age 4. He had rickets at age 5. He had pneumonia, almost died of that, and just spent a lot of time ill. His 4-year-old brother died when he was 4, or when he was 5, and his little brother was 4, in bed next to him. So big impact on his life. Going through school, he was told, you're not really going to amount much to as far as school goes, so you better plan on being a shoemaker. And he didn't really agree with that, so he really put himself into his work, worked hard at his educational path, eventually became an ophthalmologist, studied general medicine after that, and then eventually turned towards neurology and psychology or psychiatry. From this point, he really developed his ideas came together regarding his theory as far as working with people. And so from that point forward, he spent a lot of time more on sharing his theory rather than actually researching it. During his presentation schedule and everything that he did, he would still find time, though, to sing, enjoy music, and be with friends. He died in Edinburgh, Scotland. He was going to do a presentation and was on just taking a stroll and died of a heart attack at age 67. So to jump right into the theory, so ways of knowing and the major concepts regarding Adlerian therapy. He believed in holism, so looking at the person as a whole, and this led to the name of individual psychology. Now, individual psychology doesn't mean that you're looking at at just the individual. What he means is that we're undivisible or indivisible. So we have to look at the whole. People aren't the sum of their parts; they are a whole. And if looking at different parts doesn't give you the whole picture. He also looked at it as a developmental, so a teleological perspective. So he looked at the human being as all the way across the spectrum. And what's the outcome? What's the goal? And this is important as far as kind of what we help the clients see. He looked at it as phenomenological. In other words, in modern language, we would say it's a constructivist type theory. So people build their own meaning. We've talked about it a little bit in how people will have the same experience or the same event happen, but experience it very different ways depending on the internal perspectives of what was going on. Even within a family, brothers and sisters can experience the same exact events going on in their life, but have very different interpretations of what that means. Another aspect of the theory is that it's soft determinism. And what this is saying is that, yes, biology, genetics play a role in kind of what a person can do. However, a person has a will, and they are able to overcome a lot of those things that are limiting. So, for instance, in his own theory or in his own life, you're sick and you're never going to amount to much as far as an education goes. And yet he went on to study and become a doctor and eventually psychiatrist. So even though he was told this is going to limit you, he still overcame that stuff, which is a very important aspect of his theory. Social interest and community feeling. These are very important aspects because he believed well ahead of his time that being a part of society and getting out there and having a sense of belonging was really important. And lastly, the 3 life tasks that he believed that a person needed to master were social, love and marriage, and occupational. So getting involved in the community, getting involved with an individual at a very deep level, and then being successful in your occupation. The way of knowing also indicates kind of what are the roots of the issue. So when people grow up in their first social environment, which is the family, and they create, by input from others, they create this sense of self that they construct a sense of self that is limiting. They don't really understand that they're limiting themselves by their beliefs. So basic mistakes, faulty beliefs, etc., are the root of the issue. And so as they get older, they participate, or lack of participation in community can keep them from becoming their full self. Brings this idea of inferiority. So inferiority in itself is not a bad thing, because it helps create this drive to superiority, which is also one of the bases, or one of the roots. Going from this place of inferiority towards superiority is another root of Adlerian therapy. So ultimately, the aim of therapy then is to become yourself, to become the best that you can be, to strive for superiority. The therapeutic process, or the way of being with the therapist, they are collaborative and egalitarian as much as possible. There's always going to be this slight differential of power, but the Adlerian therapist tries to reduce it as much as possible. The contract, and actually they do make contracts, Adlerians, for goals, etc., is based on mutual respect. So you can be authentic and genuine with each other, and that's the goal. There's no diagnoses in Adlerian therapy. It's very positive and non-pathological, so they want to make sure that it's not so much about the what's wrong. They look at what's right and what are the strengths of this person. How can we use those to overcome these feelings of inferiority? The relationship is informative and educational. So the Adlerian therapist will spend time trying to work with the individual to say, through evaluation and assessment, this is kind of where the basic mistakes are that you're making. This is kind of a faulty belief. How can we help you with this? The therapist offers encouragement. Now, encouragement is not what you would think as far as, this is like cheerleading. That is not encouragement. Cheerleading is more along the lines of cotton candy feedback. So encouragement is working off of the successes, even if there's failures. What did go right, and how can we do things differently? I know that. So this belief, or having faith in the client, is encouragement. And then lastly, the relationship is going to foster social interest. So by developing our relationship, how can we expand this to the next level, to society and to your social contacts, and how can we develop that social interest in a person? So what it looks like, there are 4 phases. The first phase is establishing the relationship. This is just getting to know the client, where they're coming from, where they want to go, and understanding their situation in life. Second phase is to explore the individual psychological dynamics, and this is done through objective and subjective assessments. So the subjective assessment is just the information you glean while you're talking with the client. It's also going to be as you work through the early recollections, and I'll explain a little bit more about this later, but early recollections, the family constellation, And then the objective is, what is the presenting issue? When did this start? Who are the people in your life? What do you do for enjoyment? What do you do for work? All that type of stuff. Are there any illnesses, etc.? From here, the therapist will work with the client and encourage self-understanding and insight, provide some insight, or develop that insight in the client. So, and finally, the last phase is reorientation and reeducation. So, helping them reorient. If they're going down one path, that's based on faulty assumptions and basic mistakes, then how can we reorientate the person to move on a different path? And that's done through reeducation. The important thing to realize is that these 4 phases are not linear. You can kind of weave in and out of them as you're working with the client, and one may lead to making a move in another one. So overall, it kind of weaves a tapestry. Adlerians really start with the person. They want to get to know the person, where they're from, what their family of origin was like, etc. And then not necessarily focusing on the problem to begin with. Assessment is probably the most important tool and takes the longest time with Adlerian therapy. They want to make sure that they have the best understanding of the person in context. They want to know. Adler was really keen on birth order and what that means. And then finally, when the Adlerian is working with a client, they want to make sure that the techniques fit the client, not the client fitting the techniques. This has been used in education, parent education, with couples, with family, with groups. So it's very broad theory and applicable to a variety of situations. Some of the strengths and challenges are as follows. So even though this theory is very old, it's almost actually 100 years old, it's still very relevant today. Adler was ahead of his time as far as looking at multicultural issues, social justice, and understanding of individuals in context. Not only in context, but that the individuals make their own meaning out of these things as well. And it's very flexible. So you can really work with a client in Adlerian therapy and use a variety of techniques, etc., and even pull from other theory. The challenges are that it's kind of very broad and simple. One of the and it's not been very researched. So a lot of people are like, yeah, on the face value it kind of works, but what about, does it really work? And how could something so broad be effective? So, strengths and challenges. One thing that I'm going to go back. One thing that I would like to go back to is techniques. So, regarding the techniques that are kind of specific to Adlerian therapy is like spitting in your soup technique. So it makes working with a client, it makes a certain behavior look so unpleasant or maybe even grotesque that, oh, that person would never want to use it again. Another aspect of technique is like the push button. So kind of honing in on a specific behavior and really elaborating on that to the point where the client really sees the detrimental effects of that behavior. A lot of the techniques are also positive, so catching yourself in order to really apply this outside of the therapist room. Catching yourself is about oh, hey, you know what? I recognize the situation, and I'm going to catch myself before I actually step into the trap. So with Adlerian Therapy, there's a lot of different techniques that are used. To close up, I have an activity. If you could, or you could pause it so you can read it, or you can listen to me talk about it. But either way, you're going to create a family constellation for yourself. Include your family members and others who may have lived in the household. Identify the patterns of interaction you have had with each member and each member with other members in the household. So, for instance, when I was growing up, my mother was distant. She worked a lot, and when she was not working, she would spend a lot of time out drinking with friends. When she was home, she would be affectionate. Her interactions with my father were volatile and sometimes physically violent, and I worried about her and tried to keep her safe from my father. Likewise, this is confidential and for yourself, so you do not need to share this in class, but do bring it to class. After this activity is done, do some self-care. The following page is some questions that might help guide you, and these are from the old edition of the theories book. You might want to use these questions as you answer and create your family constellation. So um, some of you, this is going to be a fun activity. Some of you might bring up some stuff, which is why I would encourage you to do some self-care. All right, look forward to seeing you in class. Have a good day.